guys, Drago2020 here, and today we're going to be talking about power, but it's going to be part 2. So if you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Anyways, let's get right into the video. Just like in my speed video, I managed to find a trend in which I can scale characters to. Most of the time, high-ranking vision users have a left and or right hand man, and most of the time, the right and left hand scales to the head but below it. This means if you had to scale multiple characters that fit either left or right, you would have to scale them all to their corresponding heads. For example, Xiao to Zhongli is like Keqing and Ganyu is to Ningguang. The same goes for Xiao and Zhongli. Since Zhongli scales heavily above Ningguang, you know it means anyone who Zhongli considers his left or right hand man would scale above anyone that Ningguang considers her left or right hand man. Since Zhongli scales heavily above Ningguang, you could say that Xiao scales to Ningguang because of the size difference between Ningguang and Zhongli, and the power scaling to the left and right hand. This is very consistent when you consider that Ningguang and Xiao perform the exact same feat of creating that platform that could withstand a lot of attacks. The platform for Xiao was used differently than the platform used to hold the cannons. However, the power in both scenarios should be around the same. The amount of power I'm going to mention here is to only serve as a reference on how difficult what Xiao did was, not to scale Xiao to this character. Honestly, it's not even close. It took everything Arataki Ito had to break through that one boulder in that pocket dimension in the chasm. That's because the walls were the edges of the dimension and was constantly shifting. The fact that Ito was able to overpower this one boulder means either it was meant for him to do that, or he was so powerful he was able to overpower a small portion of that pocket dimension. Either way, he was unconscious for the rest of the trip after doing this, and he's considered a powerhouse. Now take what I said and multiply that times 1,000, because Xiao was able to overpower the entire pocket dimension at that point. Though this was through a tool that Ningguang provided for him, he still did it and was the main power source for said device. Now there are a couple exceptions for this. For example, Nervalet and Farina. In the cutscene where the Knave and Farina were talking, it became very evident who was the one who had the power. The Knave felt very comfortable talking to Farina the way she did, and received no consequences. Meanwhile, Farina basically cowered in her seat and relied on the Traveler to change the subject. There's also something important that I want to discuss. In that conversation, they were discussing the primordial water situation, and Farina didn't divulge any details and tried her best to deflect the question, instead of going down there and taking care of the flood herself. Instead, she sent Nervalet to do it, and in that moment we saw how strong he was compared to Farina. Nervalet calmly walked over to the flooding waters, and with one hand pushed back the water to its initial starting point and then sealed it. The barrier was very similar to the one that Ningguang and Xiao used in their cutscene, but the difference between this and the one that they used is that this was meant to seal something away instead of propping something up or holding something in place. By the way, Ningguang's barrier was designed to withstand the cannons used in the fight against Osile. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Whatever damage the turrets were able to do to Osile, the barrier should be able to withstand itself, because it withstood the recoil. The turrets were capable of staggering Osile and making him go all out. However, this took everything Ningguang had, because her job in that situation was literally to keep the barrier up, and she was meditating and focusing on just the barrier. The barrier in this case is more durable and more powerful than anything Ningguang was capable of doing normally, especially when she was resonating with other geoconstructs, including the Jade Chamber. The Jade Chamber seems to have a massive amount of latent energy within it, so you could say that the explosion that we saw in the end was actually less than what it normally would be if she just dropped it instead of trying to fight Osile. If you remember when the chasm first came out, there was a barrier that you had to first get rid of in order to access it. The same kind of barrier there is the same kind of barrier that Nervalet used, and are very similar, so you could say that they're the same. However, the one that Nervalet used was way more powerful. The thing that the barrier in the chasm was supposed to hold back were monsters and other dangerous things underneath the earth. The thing that Neverland held back was the primordial sea, a sea that could be as big as the Red Sea or any other thing that has the label sea on it. This is extremely impressive because of the water pressure in that scenario was extremely high. Imagine the water pressure of an entire sea the size of the Red Sea being poured out through a tiny hole a couple feet wide. This would be above mountain level because the forces here are amped because of the water pressure. With this scaling, Neverland might actually be as strong as other Archons. Now take what I said and compare it to Farina, who got pushed down and thought that she was going to be killed. Here's what happened. The knave was in a disguise and decided to see how easy it would be to take out Farina. Farina had no spatial awareness of her surroundings, got blitzed, shoved to the ground, and in her eyes she thought that this was it and started to beg for her life. The suit that the knave had on was very similar to the suits that the Fatui had outside the hotel in Mondstadt. We don't know if these characters have powers or not. Either way, they're less than cannon fodder. My point is, Farina didn't know who this person was. She thought these fodder people were more than capable of taking her out. She proceeded to cry in her room and did not sleep the entire night. Absolutely pitiful. This is one of the rare cases where the person in charge is actually weaker than the people they're commanding. After the events of 4.2, we now know that the person we saw wasn't actually the Hydro Archon, but instead something to fool Celestia. Her plan was to store up enough energy and not only take herself out and transfer the authority of Hydro to Neverland, but remove the seat of the Hydro Archon from the 7, meaning that there are now 6 seats. The final part of her plan was to make the people think that Farina was not the Hydro Archon, even though she technically was. She's basically the kid version of the adult Hydro Archon, and have the Hydro Archon sentenced to death. This will complete the process of fooling Celestia. We all got bamboozled. We got mixed. And to be honest, I didn't even see this coming either. In this scene, we learned how much control over the elements the Archons have. We learned that they have the basic ability of calling forth their element, certain sealing techniques, and to somewhat manipulate certain aspects that the element represents. This does include things like time, electro, judgment, hydro, order, geo, freedom, animal, and knowledge, dendra. However, when it comes to Celestia, they are considered lower than it, so much so that they even bow down to it. The original Hydro Archon, we can only assume, was struck down because she went against the establishment, or the rules that Celestia put in place. Pay attention to her wording. She called Celestia and the rules that they put in place an establishment, or a governmental body. If you know anything about people's views towards their government, you know that they try to reject the government and try to prepare for when the government tries to take their rights away. That's exactly what happened to the original Hydro Archon. That's why this plan had to be put in place, a direct stance against Celestia. The same thing going on here would explain why A and Zhongli felt indifferent about giving their gnosis away. This also explains why Venti was indifferent when it came to losing his gnosis. He wanted to get rid of it, but he was afraid of getting Celestia's attention, so he quote-unquote lost it to Senora and let the Tsarista take the blame and not him. By the way, this was written after 4.2, and I'm actually piecing things together as we speak on what happened across Tevat. That in itself is going to be its own video, and it's going to require more research than I did for my tier list video. Once I piece everything together, I'll be able to properly scale the characters, because this is extremely important. Before we continue on, I want to make note of something. This script was made before 4.2, and we now know some new information now that we finished the Archon quest. We now know that the Gnosis were made from the remains of the third Descender. If I remember correctly, the third Descender is the Traveler's sister. Sup guys, Drago2020 here, and I made a couple mistakes. I'm just going to tell you that right now, and I'm going to go over what I got wrong afterwards. So this only applies to this section, what I'm saying right here. So let's continue. Because he's the fourth. So this tells us a couple things. One, you don't need a gnosis to become an Archon. We know for a fact that Makoto was an Archon well before the Calamity, and that was over 500 years ago. and the Calamity was 500 years ago. We know that the Traveler you're playing with now notes that he's been asleep for 500 years, and 500 years ago was the Calamity. And if I'm assuming things correctly, 500 years ago, the other sibling woke up and started traveling through Teyvat. 2. Neverland doesn't need a Gnosis to have complete control over Hydra. He just needed the authority transferred from Folsoror. 3. Once the Gnosis is taken away, the only thing that is taken away are the extra abilities that Celestia awarded. What this tells me is that the Traveler most likely has the power of a Gnosis within him, and he doesn't know it. We can also get from this that one of the rules that Celestia has over the land is that you can only control one element. So what I can assume is that the other sibling made their journey across Teyvat the same way that the one that you're playing as did, in that they made it to Snatch Zaya and obtained all 7 elements. Then Celestia showed up, captured them, took pieces of the twin, and made Gnosis out of what was powering them. There's nothing that says that the other Traveler and the one that you're playing as right now is any different from the other, which means they might be equals when gaining corresponding elements during their journey. With this knowledge, we can say for a fact that Gnosis scales to Archons and the Traveler scales to Gnosis, because the Traveler scales to Archons and the power difference between Gnosis and Archons are negligible to 0. The only difference is Gnosis have other abilities awarded to it by Celestia. That's it. Alright, so here's what I got wrong. So the other Traveler, they are not the 3rd Descender. It is specifically stated for some reason that they are not the 3rd Descender. That doesn't make sense to me at all. But it's what they say. It's a part of the lore. So that stuff where I said that the Traveler scales to Gnosis and to Archons, but that is still true though. That is still true because he fought against both. He beat both. Even though the Archon he fought was out of his league and he needed help, he still did it, right? He still did it. Yaimiko put him in charge of doing it rather than doing it herself. And if you've seen my previous video, you should know the lore behind her in terms of power scaling, right? In short, the only thing I got wrong is that Lumine or Aether, whatever other Traveler that you didn't choose, that person is not a Descender. Everything else, including him having the power of a Gnosis within him and not knowing it, that is still true. So just replace what I said about the Traveler sister with the 3rd Descender and we should be fine. So that's pretty much the only thing I got wrong. I thought I got a whole lot more wrong. That stuff about Celestia coming in and snatching up the other twin, you can say that actually happened because that sounds like them. So back to regular video. So, without me knowing this information, I was able to prove that the Traveler scales to Archons. So whatever Archons are able to do in terms of attack, potency, and destructive power, he may be able to do, especially when you consider that their kits are meant to complement or mirror Archons of each region. So why does this matter? Well, the Versus Wiki, in my opinion, undersells the Traveler to the point where the number they show is just abysmal. By me making this video, I'm going against the Versus Wiki, which is correct on a lot of things. So I have to be as accurate as possible. I have other metrics of scaling I can use, but I can't use them right now because of the aforementioned reason. So if this video is long, that's why. Anyways, back to the regular recording. Actually, I forgot to mention something. The elements are seen as natural, meaning you can see combinations of certain elements to make different things throughout the wild. For example, pyro flowers, cryo flowers, stuff like that. Meaning that the power to control elements doesn't only come through Celestia, it's just made easier through them. The delusion is proof of this. So what they're doing is whenever they give a Gnosis to a new Archon, they take authority away from someone else and giving it to another person. I have a whole separate video that I can make based off of this now that version 4.2 is out. But I'm not going to for now because I promised other videos and I must deliver on them. This will also give me time to see how things play out with Dainslift, so sit tight, that video is going to have to wait. I have no idea how long, but it will be coming out and it will be me power scaling Celestia. Alright, let's get back to scaling.
Perfect.
Let's go back to Nervalet for a second. When he stopped the primordial sea with one hand, we didn't know exactly how big the sea was. I theorized that it was bigger than the Red Sea. It ended up being much more water than that. During the cutscene, when the water level was at its highest, you could not see the highest mountains, meaning that the maximum volume was taller than the tallest mountain in Fontaine, meaning we can calculate how much water was there by measuring the tallest mountain to the ground, and then measuring what we see from Fontaine right now as of version 1.2. But not this video, only in a specific video for Nervalet. After Nervalet and the travel encountered the all-devouring whale, they said that it came from the stars. We don't know if they mean literal stars. There are many things pointing to the fact that it might be, considering the traveler themselves isn't from Debat and is from another world. So if they say that it can devour everything into that, you could say that the whale is high continental or planetary. The bigger it grows, the more it will be able to take in, depending on whether this is continental scaling or planetary scaling. Nervalet should in fact scale to this. Let me explain. When they first encountered the whale, Nervalet said that they had no chance at beating it. The second he got the authority of Hydro transferred to him, he felt confident in taking on the whale. Now this could mean a couple things. One, this could mean that he figured that he and the traveler without the authority of Hydro weren't able to beat it. Two, he felt his own power was inferior and not the traveler's, but knew that the traveler needed help in order to win. Or three, he thought eventually the whale was going to get too strong to fight if they could fight him then. Nervalet casually one-shot Chao as he was transforming in the Foul Legacy form. You could say that Nervalet is stronger than Foul Legacy Chao without his vision and only his delusion, stronger than Foul Legacy with the vision, or stronger than just his delusion with or without the vision, and not Foul Legacy, because he didn't fully transform. Either way, Child eventually became too tired to fight the whale, and had been fighting it for several days on end, meaning Child should scale to the whale at some point before we see him again, but the whale has gotten so strong that he can no longer fend it off. This line of thinking is probably what Nervalet was referring to when he said that they had no chance of beating it. A quick line of scaling for Tartag and Nervalet. Child without his delusion seemed to not bother Nervalet, but as he began to charge into Foul Legacy, Nervalet felt like he had to intervene himself. He probably felt that once transformed, Child would be too much of a problem to handle or would endanger Farina. This is without his vision. So as of 4.2, he is stronger than he was when we first fought him in Leeway. Because of this scaling, we can say full power Child is Archon level, and scales closer to A in Zhongli than he did before. After going through the dialogue of Zhongli's interactions with Child, though he feels like he can deal with him comfortably, he admits that he may pose a massive problem in the future. This may be me looking too far into things, but considering the few times he's actually gotten involved with an issue, they were usually outrageous and abnormal situations that would require his aid in order to survive or get the job done. Ajaha is a good example of this, along with the events of the Chasm with Arataki Ito, Kuki, Yolan, and Yanfei. If he felt like he needed to get directly involved with Chao, that means that from the events of Leeway in 1.0, he was already either this strong or approaching this level of power. So as of right now, I can say that he and the Traveler are equals because of his scaling. By the way, if the Fatui are going against Celestia, they most likely won't rely on power from them. This is evident when Child is okay with giving his vision away, and he saw no power decrease because he was using a delusion. To add some context onto why he did this, for some reason, the vision lost all its power, and he could no longer use it anymore. So he gave it to the Traveler for safekeeping, and only relied on his delusion and physical strength. This also means he doesn't need his vision to enter the Foul Legacy state. This may mean at some point, Child might ditch his vision entirely for the delusion when they actually make their move against Celestia, if that's what they're doing. What this scaling means for Nervalet is that he could one-shot an off-guard Traveler if he needed to, meaning he does directly scale to the power of a Gnosis without applying the lore of how Gnosis were created. The Traveler fought the Raiden Shogun and the Wanderer with an Electro Gnosis. Though these were done at different power levels, this is still the highest tier of power in Genshin. To finish off, This means Nervalet could indeed fight with the Raiden Shogun and possibly win. This is before we saw what he does at the end of the version. With authority given to him, I do think that it's possible he can actually defeat the Raiden Shogun, even with the time skip. At least I feel confident in him beating the base Shogun. Whether he can beat base A is a different question. She does have the transformation and the sword, just like the Shogun. The difference is A is more powerful than the Shogun. Just because A got more powerful doesn't necessarily mean the Shogun itself got more powerful. It might become more powerful because A is in control of it, but when she's not, there's nothing that assumes that the Raiden Shogun without A's control is as strong as A. So for now, we will say that the Raiden Shogun is weaker than A and is at its strongest when A is in full control of it. And when A is in full control of the Shogun, I don't know if Nervalet would be able to win. Remember, A with the sword does scale to that large Shadow Lord form that we saw during the Raiden Shogun's boss battle and the regular version of it. Back on topic, the whale required 3 Archon level characters to defeat it: Child, the Traveler, and Nervalet. Meaning this thing is able to fight multiple Archons by itself. After holding it back for a while, a woman named Skirk shows up and claims that that thing is her pet. How she describes it as her pet is just downright disrespectful. She says that the only thing that it's got going for it is looks, otherwise it, quote, fails as a pet. This means that she herself is far above the whale itself, and she has a person above her who she calls her master. The more the story progresses, the closer and closer we get to characters that are able to destroy most of the vat, because if they scale this high above the whale, imagine how high they scale above everyone else. Now I could power scale how much power is necessary to take out Fossil Lord, but I can easily do that, and the point of the plan wasn't just to do that. The purpose of the sword was to remove the seat of the Hydro Archon from the 7, and I have no idea how much power is required to do that. There is literally nothing in-game and in the lore that I could find as I'm making this video that would suggest how much power exactly is required to do that, or even hinting at it. Alright, so I went back to the fan wiki to see what type of things I can find on the weapon descriptions and the stories that the weapons can tell. The Unforged straight up talks about what happened to Asia. As we know from Zhongli's account, he created Asia. Under the Unforged weapon description, it talks about how a single stretch from him caused massive earthquakes. Because of what I know of him, I'm putting him at mountain level. On the Jade Cutter weapon description, it is stated that Zhongli cut the top of a mountain off with a single sword strike. This was a casual mountain busting feat, because Zhongli was just testing out the weapon. He just swiped his sword and just cut the top off, meaning Asia scales highly to Zhongli but below him. Finally, I want to talk about the weapons itself, not the weapon descriptions this time. Certain weapons make certain characters stronger. For example, when Kazuha blocked a shot from the Shogun, he used the Iron Sting, a 4-star weapon, not his event weapon, the Freedom Sworn. If he had his actual weapon, he may have done better in this instant, but not by much. Who he was up against was totally out of his league, so for him to do what he did with what he had was actually quite impressive. I don't know if you've noticed, but the Traveler is not using the weapon he had in his initial cutscene of Genshin Impact. He is using a dull blade. He's not even using the PlayStation exclusive sword. If he did, he actually might have been more powerful. And I forgot to mention this in my speed video, but weapons do make characters faster depending on the passive and the design of the actual sword. Alright guys, that's gonna do it. The next video is gonna be an updated tier list. The first one I did, it was mostly to be at a glance, right? It's not supposed to be taken seriously at all. If you want to go watch it, go right ahead. I'll put it in the video. You should be seeing it in the right hand corner. Anyways, I just wanted to bring up something about D-Luke versus Ayato. I went over the fight for a long time, ever since I first announced it, and I come to the realization that D-Luke is so much more powerful than Ayato. His speed advantage is not even going to matter. So it's a mismatch. Instead, we're going to be doing D-Luke versus Tartag, and that's going to be my first versus match. So please like and subscribe, stay tuned, and as always, have a wonderful day.